The sun had not yet risen over New Canaan when the ships came. David Park was already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee in his hand. He watched the stars fade slowly as the sky turned from black to deep blue. Behind him, his daughter Grace slept peacefully in her small bedroom, wrapped in blankets covered with pictures of planets and rockets. David was 43 years old. His face carried the lines of a man who had seen too much. A long scar ran down the left side of his neck, disappearing beneath his shirt collar. His hands were rough and calloused from years of farm work, but they had not always worked the soil. Before New Canaan, before Grace, before his wife Maria died bringing their daughter into the world, David had been something else entirely, something dangerous. The other colonists called him the honey badger. They did not know why. They only knew that when David Park looked at you with those quiet gray eyes, something in your stomach told you not to make him angry. Grace was 7 years old. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's serious expression, but when she smiled, the whole world seemed to light up. She loved collecting rocks from the fields and giving them names. She loved pointing at the stars and asking her father to tell her stories about what lived among them. She was everything good that David had left in his life. The ships appeared without warning. One moment the sky was empty, and the next, 3 black vessels hung over the colony like dark birds waiting to strike. They made no sound. They simply existed where nothing had been before. David's coffee cup shattered on the floor. He knew those ships. Every human who had served in the outer colonies knew those ships. The Valari had come. The Valari were collectors. They came from somewhere beyond the mapped regions of space, and they had been taking slaves from weaker species for thousands of years. They were tall creatures, shaped like insects, but standing upright on 2 legs. Their bodies were covered in hard black shells, and their eyes were empty and cold like the space between stars. They did not see other beings as people. They saw them as things to be used. And they especially wanted children. David ran toward Grace's room, but he was too late. A beam of pale blue light shot through the window and struck him in the chest. His muscles locked. His body fell to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. He could not move. He could not speak. He could only watch. The neural disruptor should have paralyzed him completely. It worked on every species the Valari had ever encountered. But David had old military implants buried in his spine, leftovers from a war most people had forgotten. The implants fought against the alien technology. He could not move his body, but his eyes still worked. His ears still worked. His mind still burned with desperate fire. The front door exploded inward. 3 Valari soldiers entered, their weapons raised, their movements quick and efficient. They had done this 1,000 times before. Behind them came a larger figure, a commander judging by the markings on his shell. His name was Veth, though David would not learn this until later. "Collect the young ones," Veth ordered, his voice clicking and hissing through a translation device. "Leave the adults. They are too old to be useful." David heard Grace scream. The sound cut through him like a knife made of ice. He tried to move, tried to force his paralyzed body to respond, but nothing happened. He could only lie on the floor and listen as his daughter was dragged from her bed. "Daddy!" Grace screamed. "Daddy, help me!" A Valari soldier carried her past him. She was so small in the creature's arms, her legs kicking uselessly, her hands reaching toward her father. Tears streamed down her face. She did not understand what was happening. She only knew the monsters had come and her father was not saving her. David's eyes met hers for one terrible moment. He tried to tell her that everything would be okay. He tried to tell her that he would come for her. But his mouth would not move and no words came out. All he could do was look at his daughter as she was carried away. "Daddy!" She screamed one last time. Then the cargo doors of the Valari ship sealed shut, and she was gone. The ships lifted into the sky without a sound. They rose higher and higher until they became small dots against the brightening dawn. Then they vanished, jumping into faster-than-light travel, carrying 43 children away from everything they had ever known. David lay on the floor for 6 hours. The paralysis faded slowly, first from his fingers, then his hands, then his arms. Around him, he could hear the sounds of the colony waking up to horror. Parents screaming, people crying, the sound of a community that had been broken. When David finally stood, his legs shook beneath him. He walked to Grace's bedroom and stood in the doorway. Her blankets were thrown aside. Her favorite stuffed animal, a small bear named Captain, lay on the floor where it had fallen. The window was broken. David picked up Captain and held it against his chest. He stood there for a long time, not moving, not speaking. His face showed nothing. His eyes showed everything. He walked out of his house and across the colony to the communication center. Inside, parents were gathered, weeping, holding each other. The colony's leader was trying to contact the nearest human fleet, begging for help that would arrive too late. David ignored all of them. He walked to a private terminal in the corner and entered a code he had memorized 15 years ago. A code he had hoped never to use again. The screen flickered, and a connection opened to coordinates that did not officially exist. He typed 3 words. They took her. Then he sent the message and turned off the terminal. The colony leader approached him, her face wet with tears. "David, what are we going to do? The fleet is 3 weeks away. By the time they arrive, the children will be—" "I know where they're going," David said quietly. His voice was flat, empty, terrifying. "How could you possibly know that?" David did not answer. He walked past her, past the crying parents, past the broken pieces of his community. He walked out into the morning sun and stood alone in the center of the colony square. Something had changed in him. The quiet farmer was gone. The loving father who told bedtime stories and made pancakes shaped like stars was gone. What remained was something older. Something that had been sleeping for 15 years and had just been violently awakened. The Valari had made a mistake. They had touched his daughter. They had touched her once. They would never get a chance to touch her again. The message traveled through space at impossible speeds. It bounced from relay to relay, passing through systems that did not appear on any official map. It reached its destination in less than 6 hours. Tommy Reeves was eating breakfast on a station near the edge of human territory when his personal communicator buzzed. He glanced at the screen and froze. The fork fell from his hand and clattered against his plate. They took her. 3 words. No name attached. No explanation needed. Tommy knew only one person who had that communication code. And he knew only one her that person cared about. "Oh no," Tommy whispered. "Oh God, no." He was a big man, tall and broad with arms like tree trunks. His face was friendly most of the time, quick to smile and laugh. But right now his face had gone pale. Right now he looked like a man who had just heard that the world was ending. Tommy stood up so fast that his chair fell over. He left money on the table and ran within 2 hours. He had sent messages to every member of the old unit he could still contact. He did not explain much. He only told them 2 things. David Park needed help, and Grace had been taken. That was enough. They came from across human space. They dropped everything. They canceled jobs and broke contracts and told their families they would be back when they could. These were people who had not seen each other in years. Some had tried to forget the things they had done together. But when the call came, none of them hesitated. 17 people arrived at New Canaan over the next 2 days. They came in small ships and shuttles, alone or in pairs. They carried weapons and equipment that most civilians had never seen. They greeted each other with handshakes and hugs, but their eyes were hard, and nobody smiled. David was waiting for them in an old barn at the edge of the colony. He had not slept since Grace was taken. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes, and his face looked like it had been carved from stone. He nodded at each person as they entered, but did not speak. Tommy was the first to arrive. He grabbed David in a tight hug that David did not return. "We'll get her back," Tommy said. "I swear to God, we'll get her back." "I know," David said simply. Linda Cho arrived last. She was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had worked in military intelligence before retiring to become an information broker. She knew things about the galaxy the governments did not want anyone to know. When she walked into the barn, she was carrying a portable computer unit and several data drives. "I've been working since I got the message," she said without greeting. Her voice was cold and professional. "The Valari transport ship that hit your colony is designated Harvest 7. It's carrying 43 human children, plus an unknown number from previous raids on other species. Current headings suggest they're going to a processing station called the Crucible." "Processing?" someone asked. "Neural conditioning," Linda explained. "They break down the minds of young captives and rebuild them as obedient servants. The process takes approximately 30 days. After that, the original personality is essentially destroyed." The room went silent. David's hands curled into fists at his sides. "How long has Grace been gone?" Linda asked. 18 days by the time we could reach the Crucible," David said. His voice was still flat, still empty. "Then we have 12 days. Maybe less." An older man stepped forward. His name was James White, and he had spent 20 years studying alien species for the military. He knew more about the Valari than anyone else in human space. "The Valari don't understand what they've done," James said. "To them, offspring are just resources. They lay hundreds of eggs at a time and feel no attachment to any individual child. They cannot comprehend why a human would cross the galaxy for one small girl." "Good," David said. "I want them confused. I want them scared." Tommy moved to stand beside his old friend. "We've got 17 fighters, David, some of the best soldiers humanity ever produced. But the Crucible is a fortress. It has a fleet guarding it. We're going to be outnumbered 100 to 1 at least." David finally looked up. His gray eyes met Tommy's. "I didn't ask you to come here to fight fair." He walked to a table in the center of the barn and unrolled a set of old papers. They were hand-drawn plans, diagrams, and notes written in a code that only the people in this room could read. "The Valari think they're the top predators in this part of the galaxy," David said. "They've conquered 17 species. They've never lost a real fight. They don't know what it's like to be hunted." He pointed to the diagrams. "We're not going to attack them head-on. We're going to make them afraid. We're going to hit their supply lines, their communication relays, their patrol ships. We're going to make them bleed so much that by the time we reach the Crucible, they won't know which direction the next attack is coming from. And then?" Linda asked. "And then I'm going to walk into that station and take my daughter back. And anyone who tries to stop me is going to die." Nobody argued. Nobody suggested a safer plan. They had all served with David Park. They had all seen what he was capable of when he had nothing left to lose. They worked through the night, planning and preparing. An old military frigate called the Absolution was brought out of storage and modified for combat. Weapons were loaded. Systems were upgraded. By dawn, the ship was ready. David stood alone at the cargo bay door, looking out at the stars. Tommy came to stand beside him. "You know this might be a one-way trip," Tommy said quietly. "I know. You know some of us might not come back. I know." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question that had been burning in his mind since he arrived. "What are you going to do to them, David? When we get there, what are you really going to do?" David did not answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "The Valari have been taking children for 1,000 years. Nobody stopped them because everybody was afraid. They thought the Valari were too strong, too powerful, too far away to challenge." He turned to look at Tommy. "I'm going to show them what happens when you take something from a human. I'm going to hurt them so badly that 1,000 years from now, Valari mothers will tell their children stories about us. Stories to make them afraid." Tommy felt a chill run down his spine. He had known David Park for 20 years. He had fought beside him in battles that history had forgotten. But he had never heard his friend speak like this before. "The Valari call us weak," David continued. "They call us soft. They think because we love our children, we're easy prey." His eyes were cold and hard and absolutely certain. "They're about to learn that there's nothing more dangerous in this universe than a parent with nothing left to lose." The Absolution launched an hour later. Its engines burned bright against the darkness of space, carrying 18 humans toward an enemy that had never known defeat. The hunt had begun. The Valari supply convoy was traveling through empty space when the Absolution found them. There were 6 ships in the convoy, carrying food and equipment to the outer stations of the Dominion. They had no reason to expect trouble. This route had been safe for 200 years. They were wrong. Absolution dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly in front of the convoy. For a moment, nobody moved. The Valari captains stared at their screens, confused by the small human ship that had appeared from nowhere. Then the first missile struck. David stood on the bridge, watching the battle unfold. His face showed no emotion. His hands were steady on the controls. Around him, his team worked with silent efficiency, each person doing their job without needing to be told. The attack lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, all 6 Valari ships were drifting wreckage. The Absolution moved through the debris field, and Linda worked to extract navigation data from the remains of the lead ship's computer. "Got it," she said finally. "Full route maps to the Crucible. Security codes. Patrol schedules." She looked up at David. They never thought anyone would attack them out here. Their encryption was practically non-existent. "Good," David said. "Mark the next target." Over the following week, the Absolution struck 7 more times. They hit patrol ships and communication relays and a small refueling station. They never stayed long enough for reinforcements to arrive. They attacked without warning and vanished like ghosts. Word began to spread through the Valari Dominion. At first, the reports were dismissed as mistakes or exaggerations. A single human ship could not be causing this much damage. But as the attacks continued, the Valari commanders started to worry. Who are these humans? One commander demanded during a strategy meeting. Where did they come from? Nobody had answers. On the Absolution, David barely slept. He spent hours studying maps of the Crucible, memorizing every corridor and every doorway. He ate only when Tommy forced food into his hands. He spoke rarely, and when he did speak, his voice was quiet and cold. The others watched him with growing concern. They had all known David as a soldier, but this was something different. This was something darker. "He's scaring me," one of the team members admitted to Tommy late one night. "I've seen David in combat. I've seen him do things that gave me nightmares. But this is something else." Tommy nodded slowly. The honey badger woke up. What does that even mean? Tommy was quiet for a moment, remembering. "You know why we called him that? Back in the service? It's because honey badgers are small animals. They look harmless. But when something threatens them or their young, they don't back down. They fight lions. They fight snakes. They fight anything, and they don't stop until the threat is dead, or they are." He looked toward the bridge where David stood alone in the darkness. That's David. He was always quiet, always calm. But if you hurt someone he loved... Tommy shook his head. God help you. 3 days before they reached the Crucible, Linda managed to hack into the station's internal network. She worked for 18 hours straight, breaking through security systems that the Valari believed were unbreakable. When she finally sat back from her computer, her face was pale. I found her, she said. David was at her side in seconds. Where? Linda pointed to the screen. Processing Center, Level 7. Subject designation 7 to 19. She hesitated. David, the reports say she's fighting the conditioning. The handlers have noted that she resists excessively. They've increased the intensity of the process 3 times. Is she still herself? The latest report was filed 6 hours ago. She's still resisting. But David, Linda's voice dropped. They're getting frustrated. If she doesn't break soon, they might decide she's not worth the effort. David stared at the screen. His daughter's face looked back at him from the identification file. She looked thin and tired, but her eyes were still defiant. Still fighting. Still Grace. How many guards on that level? David asked. Approximately 200. Plus automated security systems. Layout? Linda brought up a map. The processing center is in the heart of the station. To get there, you'll have to go through the docking bay, 3 security checkpoints, and the main barracks. David studied the map in silence. Then he nodded once and walked away. The next day, the Absolution stopped at a Valari outpost on the edge of the Crucible's territory. It was a small station, used mainly for equipment storage and minor repairs. Only 50 Valari soldiers were stationed there. The team breached the station in coordinated strikes from 3 entry points. The Valari defenders were caught completely off guard. They had heard rumors about the human attacks, but they had not believed them. They had not prepared. David moved through the corridors alone. His rifle was strapped across his back, unused. In his hands, he carried a knife with a blade that did not reflect light. He encountered resistance. He removed it. The team found him in the command center, standing over the body of the station's commander. The Valari officer was still alive, but only barely. He was making sounds that might have been screaming or might have been begging. It was hard to tell. David, Tommy said carefully. We need to go. David looked up. His face was spattered with blood that was not his own. His eyes were empty. He knew things, David said. He told me. What things? The commander of the Crucible. His name is Veth. He's the one who led the raid on New Canaan. David wiped his knife clean on the dying officer's uniform. He's the one who took my daughter. Tommy glanced at the others. Nobody spoke. We got what we came for, David continued. Weapons, supplies, updated security codes. He stepped over the body and walked toward the exit. Let's go. The Absolution left the outpost as reinforcements were arriving. They jumped to faster than light before the Valari ships could lock weapons. Behind them, the outpost broadcast a desperate warning to the Crucible. They're coming. They're really coming. Prepare for attack. Commander Veth received the message on his command deck. He looked at the report from the outpost, at the list of casualties, at the description of what had been done to the station commander. For the first time in his long life, Veth felt something cold moving through his body. He did not recognize the sensation. He had never experienced it before. Fear. The Crucible sensors detected the Absolution dropping out of faster-than-light travel 12 hours later. The small human ship hung in space, making no move to attack. It simply waited. Veth stared at his display screens. 17 warships surrounded his station. 10,000 soldiers stood ready. And yet, looking at that tiny vessel, he felt his confidence slipping away. A communication request appeared on his screen. Against his better judgment, Veth accepted it. A human face appeared. Male, middle-aged, scarred. The man said nothing. He simply stared into the camera with gray eyes that held no mercy, no fear, and no humanity. Veth tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. The human stared for 10 long seconds. Then the communication ended. Veth sat in his command chair, his claws gripping the armrests so hard that the metal bent beneath them. Around him, his officers waited for orders. "Commander?" One of them asked. "What do we do?" Veth did not answer. He could not stop thinking about those eyes. Those empty, terrible, patient eyes. Death was coming, and it would not be stopped. The crucible hung in space like a dark metal spider, its many arms stretching out in all directions. Weapons covered every surface. Docking bays gaped open like hungry mouths. Somewhere inside those endless corridors, 3,000 captives from 12 different species waited to be broken dot, and one small human girl was still fighting. David broadcast his message to the station on all frequencies. His voice was calm and clear, translated into the Valari language by the ship's computer. "You have 1 hour to release all human children. After that, I stop asking." Commander Veth stood on his bridge, surrounded by his officers. The message echoed off the metal walls. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Veth began to laugh. It was a strange sound, clicking and hissing through his mandibles. His officers joined in, relieved to follow their commander's lead. One human ship against 17 warships. One human making demands of the Valari Dominion. It was absurd. It was amusing. "Destroy them," Veth ordered. "Do not waste my time with prisoners." The Valari fleet moved forward. 17 ships arranged themselves in attack formation, weapons charging, targeting systems locking onto the tiny human vessel. The Absolution should have run. Any sane crew would have fled. The Absolution accelerated directly toward the fleet. "What are they doing?" one of Veth's officers asked, confusion evident in his voice. "They're insane," another answered. They were wrong. They were not insane. They were exactly where they wanted to be. The first Valari ship fired. The shot should have destroyed the Absolution instantly. Instead, the human ship twisted at the last moment, the beam passing so close that it scorched the hull, but did not breach it. The Absolution returned fire, and a carefully targeted missile struck the Valari ship's engine array. The ship went dark and began to drift. "Impossible," Veth whispered. The next few minutes were chaos. The Absolution danced through the Valari fleet like a living thing, never where they expected it to be. Missiles launched from hidden tubes. Drones deployed in swarms, crashing into weapon systems and sensor arrays. Electronic warfare programs that Linda had spent 2 weeks perfecting turned Valari communications into scrambled noise. The humans were not trying to destroy the fleet. They could not win that fight, and they knew it. They were buying time. They were creating confusion, and while the fleet burned around the crucible, the real attack began. Linda activated the viruses she had planted in the station systems. Half of the crucible's weapons went offline instantly. Docking bay doors opened without command. In the military sections, life support systems began venting atmosphere into space. The Absolution broke through the chaos and headed straight for an open docking bay. Valari fighters pursued, but Tommy was at the weapons controls, and Tommy never missed. 3 fighters exploded. 2 more collided as they tried to avoid the debris. The rest fell back, suddenly uncertain. The Absolution crashed into the docking bay rather than landed. The impact threw everyone forward, but they had prepared for this. They were moving before the ship stopped sliding across the metal floor. The team split into groups. 6 went left to disable the remaining defense systems. 5 went right to free the captives in the holding cells. The rest stayed with the ship to prepare for Extraction. David went alone. He moved through the corridors of the crucible like a shadow made of violence. His rifle had been left on the ship. He carried only his pistol and his knife. He did not need more. The first Valari soldier he encountered never saw him coming. The second saw him but could not raise his weapon in time. The third managed to fire once, the shot burning past David's head, before the knife found his throat. David did not slow down. He did not stop to check bodies or confirm kills. He had memorized the route to the processing center. He had memorized every turn, every door, every possible obstacle. Nothing was going to stop him. Alarms screamed through the station. Emergency lights flashed red. Over the intercom, officers shouted contradictory orders. The Valari had never faced an assault like this. They had never imagined anyone would dare attack the crucible. Their confusion was David's greatest weapon. He reached the processing center in 7 minutes. The doors were sealed, reinforced metal designed to withstand explosions. David pressed his hand against the control panel and entered the codes. Linda had extracted from the station's network. The doors opened. Inside. The processing center looked like something from a nightmare. Long rows of metal chairs stretched across the room, each one holding a small figure. Wires and tubes connected the captives to machines that hummed with terrible purpose. Most of the children had their eyes closed, their faces blank, their minds already half destroyed. But in the center of the room, one chair held a girl with dark hair and defiant eyes. Electrodes were attached to her temples. Lights blinked on the machines around her. A Valari technician stood beside her, adjusting controls. Grace. The technician turned at the sound of the door opening. He saw David standing there, covered in blood, pistol in hand. The technician's claw moved toward a panel on the wall. "Touch that button and I will hurt you in ways you cannot imagine," David said. The technician's claw stopped. "Step away from her." Slowly. The technician obeyed, mandibles clicking nervously. "You cannot stop the process. If you disconnect her improperly, her brain will be damaged permanently. Then you're going to tell me how to disconnect her properly." David raised his pistol. "And then you're going to die. How much you suffer in between depends on the next 30 seconds. The technician told him. It took less than 30 seconds. David worked quickly, following the instructions exactly. He removed the electrodes first, then the neural interfaces, then the drug feeds. Gracie's eyes fluttered. Her body twitched. She made a small sound of confusion. "Grace," David said softly. "Grace, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened slowly. They were unfocused at first, clouded by drugs and pain. She looked up at the figure standing over her, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A man, scarred, exhausted, covered in blood that was not his own. Recognition flooded through her. "Daddy?" she whispered. David fell to his knees beside the chair. His hands were shaking as he pulled her into his arms. All the coldness, all the emptiness, all the terrible patience that had carried him across the galaxy collapsed in an instant. "I'm here, baby," he said, his voice breaking. "Daddy's here. I've got you. I've got you." Grace wrapped her thin arms around his neck and held on as if she would never let go. She was crying. He was crying. Neither of them cared. Around them, the station continued to burn. Alarms continued to scream. Soldiers continued to die. But in that moment, none of it mattered. David picked up his daughter and held her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing. She was so thin, so fragile. But she was alive. She was still herself. She was still his Grace. "I knew you would come," she whispered against his shoulder. "I kept telling them. My daddy was coming. My daddy would find me." David closed his eyes and pressed his face against her hair. "I will always come for you," he said. "Always, no matter what. No matter where. I will always find you." He carried her out of the processing center. stepping over the body of the technician he had killed after getting the information he needed. He moved back through the corridors, past the wreckage of his assault, toward the docking bay where the Absolution waited. Behind him, the Crucible was falling apart. The team had done their work well. Systems were failing. Fires were spreading. The remaining Valari soldiers were more interested in saving themselves than stopping one human with a child in his arms. Tommy met him at the ship. The big man's eyes went wide when he saw Grace. Is she? She's okay, David said. She's going to be okay. They boarded the Absolution. The others were already there, along with hundreds of freed captives from a dozen species. The ship was overcrowded, damaged, and low on fuel. David did not care. He had what he came for. The Absolution lifted off from the burning station and flew toward the stars. Behind them, the Crucible continued to collapse. The Valari fleet, what remained of it, was too damaged to pursue. In a small corner of the crowded ship, David sat with Grace in his lap. She had fallen asleep, exhausted by her ordeal. He held her carefully, gently, as if she might break if he gripped too tight. Tommy came and sat beside him. Neither man spoke for a long time. Finally, Tommy asked, "What now?" David looked down at his sleeping daughter. For the first time in weeks, his face showed something other than cold determination. It showed love. "Now," he said quietly, "we go home." But they were not finished yet. There was still one more thing to do. The Crucible fell in 6 hours. When the fires finally stopped burning and the emergency systems failed completely, 3,000 captives had been freed. Children and adults from 12 different species escaped into the waiting arms of rescue ships that Linda had coordinated through her network of contacts. The Valari lost 8 warships that day. 4,000 soldiers died on the station or in the space around it. But numbers alone could not capture what had truly been lost. For 1,000 years, the Valari Dominion had built its empire on fear. They were the masters. They were the hunters. Other species cowered before them, offered tributes of their young, and prayed to be overlooked. The Crucible was the symbol of that power. A place so terrible that even speaking its name made lesser beings tremble. 18 humans had torn it apart. The news spread across Valari space like wildfire. Officers whispered to each other. Soldiers looked over their shoulders. For the first time in living memory, the Valari knew what it felt like to be prey. Commander Veth survived the battle. He was captured by Tommy's squad as he tried to flee the burning station. They brought him to the Absolution in restraints, his proud stance broken, his confidence shattered. David was waiting for him in the cargo bay. Grace was finally sleeping peacefully in a small medical cabin, watched over by James White. For the first time in weeks, David had allowed himself to rest. He had eaten a meal. He had washed the blood from his hands. He had held his daughter until she drifted off. And he had sat beside her bed until he was certain she would not wake screaming. Now he stood before the creature who had taken her. Veth was taller than David by almost 2 feet. His shell was darker than most Valari, marked with the patterns that indicated high rank. His eyes, usually cold and empty, now showed something new. They showed defeat. "You destroyed everything," Veth said through his translator. His voice was hollow. "The station. The fleet. My soldiers. My career. My honor. Why? For one child?" David looked at him without expression. "Yes, I do not understand." Veth's mandibles clicked in confusion. "She is one small creature. One insignificant life among billions. How could she be worth this much destruction?" "That's why you lost," David said quietly. "That's why you were always going to lose. You don't understand what she means to me. You can't understand. Your species doesn't feel what we feel." He stepped closer to the Valari commander. Veth flinched. expecting violence, expecting the end that he had seen coming since the moment the HFY absolution appeared on his screens. But David did not raise his weapon. He did not reach for his knife. "You're going to live," David said. Veth stared at him. "What? You're going to return to your dominion. You're going to stand before your leaders and your people. And you're going to tell them what happened here." David's voice was calm, almost gentle. But his eyes were anything but gentle. "Tell them what 18 humans did to your station. Tell them what we did to your fleet, your soldiers, your reputation. Tell them everything." "Why?" Veth asked. "Why would you let me go?" "Because I want them to understand something." David's eyes locked onto the Velari commanders. "Your people have been taking children from across the galaxy for centuries. You thought no one would stop you. You thought no one could stop you. The other species were too weak, too scared, too far away from your territory to fight back." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I want every Velari to know the truth. You can raid 100 worlds. You can enslave 1,000,000 beings. You can build empires on the suffering of innocents. And the galaxy will weep and do nothing." David's voice dropped lower. "But if you touch a human child, if you touch my child, I will find you. I will tear apart everything you have built. I will burn your stations and kill your soldiers and break your fleets. And when I am finished, I will make sure you live long enough to watch your empire. Remember what fear feels like." Veth's body trembled. "You are one human." David shook his head slowly. "No, I am a father. And there are billions of us." He turned and walked toward the cargo bay door. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "Tell your people one more thing," he said. "Tell them this was personal. Tell them the honey badger sends his regards." Then he was gone. 3 days later, Veth was released in a small escape pod at the edge of Velari space. He returned to his people and stood before the High Council. He told them everything. He showed them the footage from the battle, the images of burning ships and dying soldiers. He described the human who had spoken to him, the cold gray eyes, the quiet voice, the absolute certainty. The council listened in silence. When Veth finished, they asked him one question. "What do we do now?" Veth thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the power of the Dominion, the strength of their fleets, the centuries of conquest that had built their empire. He thought about all the reasons they should strike back, punish the humans, show the galaxy that the Velari would not be intimidated. And then he thought about those eyes. Those terrible, patient, merciless eyes. "We leave them alone," Veth said finally. "We never raid human space again. We never touch their children. We pretend they do not exist." The council was outraged. They shouted and argued and threatened. But Veth simply stood before them and waited for them to understand. Eventually, they did. The order went out across Velari space within a week. All raiding operations in human-occupied territories were to cease immediately. Any Velari vessel that encountered humans was to withdraw without engagement. The order came without explanation, without justification. It simply was. The other species noticed. Word spread through slave markets and resistance networks and refugee camps. The Velari were afraid. The Velari were backing down. And they were doing it because of humans. The liberated species began calling humans something new. In some languages, it translated as the vengeful ones. In others, the ones who come back. In all of them, it meant the same thing. Hope. Somewhere in the galaxy, there was a species that fought back. A species that did not forgive. A species that would cross the stars themselves for one child. David returned to New Canaan with grace. The colony welcomed them home with tears and celebration. The other parents whose children had been taken embraced David, thanking him over and over until he finally had to retreat to his house just to find silence. He rebuilt their home. He planted a garden. He watched his daughter heal, slowly, day by day. The nightmares came less frequently. The fear faded from her eyes. She started collecting rocks again, giving them names, lining them up on her windowsill like old friends. One night, Grace asked him about his nickname. She had heard the others talking, and heard them call him the honey badger when they thought she was not listening. David sat down beside her bed and thought about how to explain. Honey badgers are small animals, he said finally. They lived on Earth a long time ago. They weren't the strongest animals or the fastest. They didn't have the biggest teeth or the sharpest claws. But they were brave. They fought lions. They fought snakes. They fought anything that threatened them or their babies. And they never, ever gave up. Grace looked up at him with eyes that had seen too much for her age. Is that why the aliens are scared of you? David smiled. It was the first real smile he had worn in months. They're scared because I have something worth fighting for, he said. They're scared because I have you. Grace reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and thin, still recovering from weeks of captivity. But her grip was strong. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, baby. More than anything in the universe. He sat with her until she fell asleep. Then he walked out onto the porch of their small house. The stars were bright overhead. Thousands of points of light scattered across the darkness. Somewhere out there, the Valari were rebuilding. Somewhere out there, other children were still suffering. But tonight, his daughter was safe. Tonight, she was home. And that was enough. The story spread across the galaxy in the years that followed. It was told in whispers and songs and prayers. It was taught to children of 100 species as proof that monsters could be beaten, that the darkness was not absolute, that somewhere in the cold void of space, there were beings who would risk everything for love. The Valari made a mistake. They touched the child once. The honey badger made it personal, and the galaxy would never forget.